Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night. That means it's your chance to ask me any question that you like that is currently stumping you on your property development journey and see if I can help you on your journey. That said, in order to submit questions, the link below, propdev.info/open mic. Submit those questions in advance, and that gives me a little bit of time to prepare and give you the insights that you need in order to help you on your journey. Now, that said, got a cracking show ahead of you today with a whole bunch of questions. Hopefully, we can get through them all. The first one comes from Bo. Now, Bo says, I've looked at land with 1,000 square meters to build 3 to 4 townhouses. How do I do the feasibility? This is my very first project. Bo, there's there's a ton of questions that are actually sitting hidden within here. The fact that you're saying, how do I do my feasibility, means that you are so new into this, and also that when you say this is your first project, it's telling me that it might be something that for your very first crack, that you need to probably have a little bit more homework behind you with regards to your education in saying what are the things that actually go into it. Now, feasibility is actually in itself quite simple. So it is doing two things. Thing number one, your site analysis, understanding every single issue, challenge, and problem that is actually going to sit on the site. Now, that is going to take education in order to learn what kind of issues and challenges can go wrong on a project. So if you go in blindly, you may not see the issue or challenge that is actually sitting there. So if you don't see it, it will never make it onto the feasibility, and you won't know that the problem is actually there. So the feasibility will look fantastic, but unfortunately the problem will still actually eventuate. So that is problem number one. Problem number two is you need to be very good at your sales analysis. So what should you be buying it for, and what should you be selling it for? What is a finished product actually going for? Now, if you can do those two things, then the feasibility is just adding and subtracting those two elements to give you the outcome that hopefully will give you the feasibility that you're actually, the profits that you're actually looking for. Now, the challenge here is the fact that you've not done a project before, and clearly you're very new at the property development journey. So my strong suggestion is come to one of our meetups, and I can see if I can find the link to those. So we run these meetups all the way around the country. Not knowing where you're physically based, the rules and regulations in every single state are very, very different. So come to that, find some people that are actually doing exactly what you're doing, and try and get some insights from them with regards to what your zoning needs to be, what your land size needs to be, that sort of thing. Now, you could go spend some hard money and go talk to a town planner and actually try and go down that path and work it out yourself. But if you do so, you might spend a lot of money and then find out that the deal wasn't a deal. Instead, my suggestion, actually learn the process first, okay? So we have a free course that will actually help you. See if I can find my free course link somewhere here. I can't find it, but I'll find it in as we go. So I've got in the free course side of things, it's going to give you some insights into kind of things to actually look for. But here it is. This is my free course. So go and watch this. It's going to give you some insights into what you need to actually understand in order to become a property developer. Now, at the end of this, I promise you're not going to be a property developer. You can't, in a small, short course like this, know everything that you need to know in the process. But what you can do is actually understand what are the things that you want to be looking for. The other reason why I said is come to the meetups is we actually record all of those, and you can actually become an annual member and actually look at the back catalog of those. And in doing so, you can then, so this is the PDN annual membership, you can actually look at all the real deals that other people have presented over time and actually go, what are the deals that look exactly like what I'm doing in the area that I'm doing it, and have a look at the kind of issues and challenges and problems that those people have actually faced. Maybe even reach out to a couple of those people who've presented and go, hey, can you actually help me on your journey? Now, if all of that has given you enough insights to say, hey, I want to look at this a little bit deeper, we also have a 12-month education and mentoring program. I don't want to do a full pitch on that here, but just letting you know that it actually does exist. If you want to do that, reach out to us. It's called Property Development Formula, and we'd more than happily have a chat to you about how do you actually learn the process. Now, my strong guidance is that at the very, very start, because you've not done this before. Step carefully. You only get to make mistakes one time, and it's much better to actually learn the process first before stepping in, rather than actually learning it in the middle of a deal and find out the deal was a dud deal. Now, 90% of all deals out there that are developable are typically not profitable. And so what we want to make sure for you is that you find one of those 10% that are. And if it is one of those 10%, then the ability to learn on the job is there. But if it's not, if it's one of the 90%, then you're still going to get some learnings, but unfortunately, some of those learnings are going to have some fairly significant financial impacts as well. So we want to make sure that you do it safely. So lots of different ways to do that: the formal side, the free course, turn up to some meetups, become an annual member, and look at other people's real deals. So hoping that will actually help you on your journey, Bo. Now, next one, Ryan. Ryan says, with the trade shortages, unpredictable weather, and rising costs putting huge pressures on project timelines and margins, how do you see developers adapting their feasibility and delivery models over the next 12 to 24 months? I'm especially curious about the rise of modern methods of construction, like prefabrication facade and panel systems, in compressing programs and unlocking faster capital recycling. Would love to hear your thoughts. Well, Ryan, this is very much the future. Modern methods of construction is very much the future of construction in Australia for a lot of reasons. Firstly, I want to say modern methods of construction have been, and prefab is one of, I guess, the terminologies used there, has been used for many, many years outside of Australia. So in Europe, they've been doing modern methods of construction for well over 40 years. And Australia is one of those late comers to the market. And so we're very, very, very much in catch-up mode. And the challenge is, as you've highly, I guess, articulated, or well articulated, I should say, trade shortages and rising costs are putting huge pressures on projects. And especially in this post-COVID environment where the cost of construction has gone up, so many builders actually went broke. A lot of tradies have actually left the industry. And so there's fewer and fewer builders actually around. So modern methods of construction, I see, is the future. Now, there are many, many methods considered under modern methods of construction. So there are panelized systems, there are kit of part systems, there are volumetric systems. There's a whole bunch of these that actually sit here. But the concept behind it is that the majority of it is done in a factory, in a controlled environment. And then when you come to site, it is assembling those elements together. And in doing so, then you get, I guess, much more efficiency on the ground. Okay. Now, which means that a lot of the and it also changes how our project management side of things actually occurs. So things are done very, very differently by changing where the system's actually done. Now, firstly, at a very, very, very high level, so from a will it do tradies out of a job? The answer is no. Instead of being out in the field, they're probably going to be more sitting in a factory at the moment, with some people out in the field doing the assembly side of things. But because they're doing it in a factory, the efficiency comes much, much higher. So firstly, you don't have a tradie who, I guess, has to unload his toolbox in the morning and load it back up at the end of the day. They're not having to whip out to Bunnings or the local hardware store to actually pick up some materials halfway through the day, but rather they're actually picking it up from, I guess, a well-managed inventory system that's sitting inside the shop. You're not doing it in the weather, so as a controlled environment, you're not in harsh conditions. I guess the tradies are actually well protected, so their efficiencies are much better, nicer environments. So they're not, they're not exposed to elements when it's raining, so they can work all the time. They're not, I guess, overheating themselves because they're in the shade. So there's lots of things that actually work, plus the opportunity to potentially use processes and automations and that sort of thing to actually build these things a little bit faster. Okay, so then that's in the factory side of things. Now that can be done much more efficiently if and only if the project has been designed for modern methods of construction. Now, in order to do that, you need to be asking your architect for what is called DFMA, designed for manufactured assembly. Now, if you come up with a standard design, then your builder has no choice but to build it the traditional way. Okay, it's called a stick build, where he picks up a stick, gets some hammers and nails, and actually puts that together. If, however, they use DFMA, designed for manufactured assembly, then the builder has a choice to actually use one of these modern methods of construction and get it built in a factory. Now, as I said, there's panelized, so that is like a flat pack like IKEA, and you can actually do that. There's also volumetric, where the room is entirely built out, and there's everything in between, with whether it be timber frames, steel frames, whether they be insulated panels. They can have cladding on them, they can have not have cladding. But I have seen, I guess, and we're looking at this in one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment. Some of the manufacturers that we're working on, we've got examples of projects with, 10 to 15 townhouses, for example, from laying the slab to handing the key over to the actual finished owner, 51 days start to finish. That is the power of using modern methods of construction. And as I said, there are many, many technologies out there that can actually do this. The challenge is design for it up front. The other challenge is the builders themselves wanting to come on board and come onto this journey. Now, lots of builders are curious about this and interested in the process, but they're worried that it's going to take away from their livelihood. I'm going to encourage the builders, it's actually going to add to their livelihood. It means instead of taking 12 months to build a home, they can actually take 2 months to build a home, which means that they can build 6 times more homes a year, which means 6 times more profit in theory. Okay, so lots of opportunity for builders to actually do more with less, but they will need very good finishing trades, because in assembling the product on site, there is some assembly side of things. Now, there are some challenges in all of this, and that is that there's not many factories in Australia that actually do this. There are plenty of factories overseas, but there's not many factories in Australia at this point in time. I have personally been inside about 15 factories, both overseas and here in Australia, and can say that things are moving very, very fast. I am also on the board for the modern methods of construction policy updates that are actually occurring here in Queensland. So I'm very, very well connected in that regard, with our first meeting that panel having happened only, I guess, only this month. And what I can say is it's trying to address the fact that we've got huge challenges all the way across the country with regards to everybody just understanding, I guess, the approval frameworks that actually sit here, because everyone's afraid of what happens if it's built in a factory, who owns the warranty on those, and who has to do the inspection of the plumbing and the electrical, when sometimes that has to be a local person, but it's actually been built interstate. And there's a whole bunch of challenges that are actually happening, but what I can say is the industry is actually coming together. So over the next 12 to 24 months, I see huge changes in this department. And whilst a lot of housing is happening at the moment in this regard, generally it's a local factory delivering locally, whereas where I see it moving in the future is, something that's built in one state might be shipped to another state because they specialize in a particular kind of product. I see a lot more material being purchased overseas and brought in, and I guess approval processes done that way. I see lots of things happening in that regard, but very good question, Ryan. And I guess let's just say that that things are going to change massively. If anyone out there is actually looking to do any new design at all, my strong encouragement is repeatability, consistency, and design for manufactured assembly. If you do that, not only will the cost of the the project come down. And typically, it's not going to be the cost of the construction that comes down, but rather it's going to be the holding cost of the project that actually comes down. So I don't see huge savings in the construction cost, but I do see the savings in the holding costs at this moment in time. But if you can do repeatability and consistency, that's where the efficiencies are going to start to come in. So if you're building one house, not much repeatable. If you're building 10 houses, lots repeatable. If you're building 20, even more. So if you design for that repeatability, and the repeatability doesn't have to be in a single project. You might be doing a duplex on one side of the suburb and another duplex on the other side of the suburb. There's no reason why you can't have near on identical designs with a slightly different facade and have that repeatability and consistency. That's going to be the thing that makes, this way more efficient. Anyway, hope that helps. Now, along similar lines, next question comes from Eric. Now, Eric hasn't really asked a question per se, but more of a statement, but I'm going to kind of turn it into a question for him. He says, "Hi, Rob. I'm looking at putting modular built homes to put on small lot developments, which only take 3 months to build, and they transport and stump it, and then I have to connect the services. This builder is very respected and been operating for over 30 years, small 2 or 3 bedroom house, and put them up on 3-meter stumps so first home buyers can develop them underneath later on. Uh, I did a few of these projects a few years ago in Brisbane, and they all sold to first homeowners with really good results. The main reason for this is I get to be in and out quickly, like 15 months instead of a few years, with holding costs. And these small homes have good finishes at approximately 70 square meters, around 300K. Very good. One of my greatest regrets is getting bogged down in long, drawn out building times. As I said, it was more of a statement. So, what I will do is try to turn that into a question. So, Eric, I guess well done. We're just talking about modern methods of construction just literally moments ago. A couple of things I would say here. So, firstly, if you're selling to first homeowners, then they're probably not necessarily going to be an attractive product being 3 meters in the sky day one. Now, the thing is that if it's on stumps, it can easily be lifted later on for very, very minimal costs. I'd be looking at making it much more attractive first go so they can just drive up and walk on. That's going to open up the opportunity to sell it to way more people, not necessarily just first homeowners, but maybe people that are actually downsizing as well. And they might be, wanting to simplify their life, cash in on, the big backyard, go into a smaller dwelling, and not necessarily have to navigate stairs and the like. Now, the fact that you're thinking for someone else, maybe not, they may or may not want to build underneath at a later point in time, understanding that it is a smaller home. But I would potentially say to them, hey, we could put it up, up in the air, or we can put it down on the ground, but sell it off the plan. Get some feedback before you actually just go and do it. Now, it's not a huge cost difference between the two. The stumping costs are a little bit more expensive when they're higher up because they have to take the wind load when it's up in the air and make sure that when the wind blows that the house doesn't lean and that sort of thing. But putting it down on the ground will save a whole bunch of costs and more aesthetically pleasing. So you might find that they might sell a little quicker. Now, that said, sounds like you've got a builder that's kind of doing these volumetric, which we were just talking about a couple of moments ago, where they come as the entire house and they just kind of bolt them together. Which means that they've probably got some pre-designed plans that actually sit in and around those. That's great. That gives repeatability and consistency, and one of the reasons why it is relatively cheap. But it's also a relatively small home as well. So first thing I would say is understand your demographic. Who is the exact person that you're actually selling to? I know that you said it's more attractive to first home buyers, but in that particular area, is that where first home buyers are going? So if the answer to that is yes, great idea. If the answer to that is no, maybe it's an aging population that are going into there. Think about the people that are actually moving in. So understand the demographic, put the right product in place. But otherwise, Eric, fantastic idea, mate. We are just literally talking about this 2 seconds ago about the opportunity with modern methods of construction. So well done. So Ruben says, I'm really interested in doing real estate development and scaling the business to do larger projects and rezoning only issue. Sorry, and rezoning only issues as I'm super worried about the market in America and future market projection Australian market, and feel if I do that, there's an exit of 1 year or more. That's going to become too risky. Thus, feel my time learning to development is a waste, and I should be learning another business that is more stable in a crashing economy. Need some insights into my thinking. So, firstly, Ruben, thank you for asking the question, mate. And I am not by any means an economist, and so very much want you to take what I'm about to say as I guess just my thoughts, and absolutely under no circumstances is to be considered. I guess. Advice. Okay. But educational in nature. Here we go. That's the thing I was looking for. Um, Look, my personal opinion, you need to really be worried about the Australian market and not the American market. Okay. I guess if we're always worried about overseas markets, then impacting us, then there will be forever in this what if scenario as to what are we going to do. Now, is it possible that the American market can cause some problems here? The answer to that is absolutely categorically yes, it is possible. But what is the likelihood of that? Well, I think you need to look at the strength of this market first to understand whether or not it can be resilient to that. Now, when we look at this market, the supply and demand fundamentals that are actually sitting here, we've got a huge housing crisis. We've got a huge influx of international migrants. We have a demand for 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years, of which we are going to fall way short. We're over 450,000 houses short in that projected timeline. So there is a huge opportunity here. Now, on the off chance that something in the American market does cause an impact here, I do not believe it's going to be catastrophic. It might pause the market, it might cause some impacts to the market, but I don't believe that it's actually going to take us out. Now, that said, Trump is doing a whole bunch of things to reset the American economy. Now, I have some personal thoughts on this that I won't articulate here, but I think most of that is more about him lining his pockets and less about fixing the American economy. And so I think there's going to be some short-term, I guess, forced crashes that will very, very fast recover as I guess well cashed up, fast acting people will then bring that market very, very quickly back. And I think Australia is going to be resilient that sit in around that. Now, that's again my personal opinion. I cannot say that's going to be a fact. So do your own homework on that. But what you rightly pointed out is it's going to take you some time to learn to do this property development gig. Most people are going to take somewhere between 6 and 12 months to learn the process before they go and implement. There's nothing wrong with actually taking the time to learn. And then at that point, most of the turmoil that you're actually talking about will probably be gone. Okay. So I think you'll be coming to the back end of Trump's reign, for want of a better word. And I guess some stabilization will probably come back into the market. At worst, here's my thoughts. At worst, you'll have learnt a new trade. You have not yet executed on that trade. Now that you're smart enough to actually understand what actually goes into it, you can make a more informed decision on whether or not you actually pull the trigger and actually going into a deal, rather than at the moment speculating because you don't yet know how to do property development and you're worried about it in the international market. Get yourself deal ready. When you're deal ready, doesn't mean you have to dive in, just means that you actually understand what it takes to actually understand that a deal is actually there. So feel free. We've touched on this a little bit earlier in the call, but come to our physical meetups. We run these all the way around the country. You're going to see industry experts. You're going to see real deals being presented. Very, very worthwhile in turning up to that. So hoping to see you at one of those in the near future, Ruben. Next question comes from Josh. And it's very interested in learning this skill of property development. I just want to understand the pricing. Well, Josh, when you say the pricing of the project, the pricing of the education, the pricing of those sorts of things, very difficult to understand exactly what you're actually talking to. But from a project perspective, I guess there's a lot of things that need to actually go into it. I guess you've got the purchase cost, you've got lands, you've got stamp duty, you've got holding costs, you've got, I guess, your town planner, your civil engineer, your architect. You've got your application fees, you've got your council contribution fees, you've got your holding costs, and a whole bunch of other things that go into it. Now, depending upon what strategy you're doing, I guess those costs will vary. Depending upon the area that you're doing it, those costs will vary. And depending upon, I guess, the way you want to exit the deal and how you're going to fund the deal, that will vary as well. So when we talk about understanding the pricing of a project, I guess we need to have a little bit more insights into what you're actually trying to do, mate. But again, you're probably another great candidate to say, come to one of our meetups. Go and do our free course, and that's this one here. Go and do our free course. Just get some insights into what that actually looks like, and I guess if that kind of makes some sense to you, then feel free to reach out and we can have a chat from there. Okay, next one, Paul. Paul says, what's the idea for first deal with low money? Paul, there are many ideas here with regards to low or no money. Now, what is super important is that money is going to be needed for a deal. I cannot stress this enough, but it doesn't always have to be yours. Okay, there are three lots of money that are typically needed: a deposit, serviceability, and liquid cash to run the deal. Okay. But depending on how creative you are in structuring your deal, you may be able to avoid some of those or defer some of those to later in the process, allowing you, by controlling the property rather than owning the property, allowing you to actually add value to the property and then find ways to back that out a little bit later in the process. Now, we teach 8 different methods on low and no money down. I can't go into all of them right here, but what I can tell you is give you some examples of what is possible, for example. So if you did a joint venture with the landowner, well, you are not actually purchasing the property, so no deposit and no serviceability. So all you really need then is the liquid cash to actually run the deal, right? If you're working with a money partner, then they might be able to provide the deposit, the serviceability, and the liquid cash. You provide the sweat equity, and they provide the money side of things. If you do something like a delayed settlement with early access, well, you will need deposits and serviceability, but not today. We're going to defer that to later on, which means that you're going to improve your holding costs. So you won't have interest rates, you won't have land tax, you won't have rates until such time as you actually settle. Now, depending upon how long you defer that, you may be able to potentially have sold the finished product before you actually own the first product, which means that the cash flow perspective, I guess, backs out the original purchaser. You could be raising money partners where they invest in your deal and a whole bunch of things like that. So there's lots of different ways to actually do this, Paul. The key thing is that you do not want to let your lack of resources stop you from being resourceful. So understand, firstly, what is the deal needing to get done? Then understanding your personal circumstances. What is the gap between these? Okay. Now, when you understand the gap between these, you've got a toolbox of 8 low and no money down strategies. Which one of those is going to solve the gap? And when we actually understand how to solve the gap, then we're going to try and present that through to the vendor in such a way that it actually is going to be a win-win scenario for both of you. Now, there's a lot of things that actually have to happen in regards to that. Firstly, you need to understand what the methodologies are. Secondly, you need to be very, very good at actually unlocking what is the vendor's needs in the deal, and then you need to position your solution with regards to your creative acquisition in such a way that you can demonstrate that it meets that vendor's needs. If you do all of those, then no and low money down deals can be done. And there's a ton of those being done in our community. As a matter of fact, nearly 80% of all the Real Deal presentations at our monthly meetups involve some form of low or no money down strategy. So very, very worthwhile, and very, once you've got the skill, can be applied again and again and again. Next question comes from Nikki. Nikki says, what is the best way to find investors to work with on a property? Thank you very much. Well, Nikki, the first thing is you need to be aware of all of your ASIC requirements with regards to raising capital. There are some strong things that you need to be aware of in that regard. I can't actually give you advice in this department. All I can do is kind of give you some insights to say there's a thing called the 2012-2 rule that you need to be understanding for, I guess, your typically that's going to be for your first project or two. So no more than 20 people that you know personally with a personal invitation. In any 12 months, raising no more than $2 million. Okay, that's your first threshold. If you're raising any more than $2 million for your project, then you're probably going to need some form of Australian Financial Services license, AFSL license, and then after that, I guess you can borrow that through what they call a CAR, Certified Authorized Representative, or you may actually go and get your own AFSL license in order to do, I guess, raise the capital on an ongoing basis. What I would say, though, is nobody will ever lend you money if they do not know, like, and trust you. Okay, so you've got to build a whole bunch of rapport and credibility and capability for people to want to invest in you, especially if they are complete strangers. Now, the people that are located inside this device here in your phone, they already know, like, and trust you. They are most likely your best candidates. They are known to you personally. They would be great candidates for the 20 people that you know personally that you can reach out to, because they already know you in your first world, your first career. They know what you deal with, what you like as a person, how you deal with challenges. I guess your tenacity in be able to navigate challenging situations, that sort of thing. That's what people want to know. If they're going to invest in you, they want to know that you're going to treat their money with the same level of respect as you would actually be treating your own. So know, like, and trust, Nikki. That is the key. Next one comes from Shani. Shani says, how do I trust I will get all the information to be successful in property development? I'm brand new to this and will be undertaking this as my new career with my partner. I have much fear, but still want to pursue from a place of success and trust. Shani, that is a fantastic question. We've actually covered a lot of this already with some of the prior questions, but educate yourself before going in. Now, what I can say is that I have been in property since the age of 18, 20 years of buy and hold, and about 17 years so far in the development side of things. And what I can say with that amount of knowledge, I am still learning every single day. So I do not want you to think that when I know it all, that's when I'll do it. Okay. What you need to know is enough to get you to the next stage. Okay. Just in time learning, you need to have the big picture in mind. Where do I want to go? And then what is the thing that I need to learn today that's actually going to take me in that direction and move you slightly towards it? Now, as you go through the journey, lots of different ways you can learn. School of hard knocks and just try and work it out yourself. You can learn by following the pathway and success of other people. So watching real deals, partnering with those people, maybe even investing in someone else's deal that's the same strategy as you want to do. You can learn through formal education programs, which we've already kind of touched on. Either way, in some way, shape, or form, you are going to pay either through effort, through cash, or through time. Okay, so opportunity costs. So you might, if you want to work it out yourself, it's going to take you longer to get there. Okay, so that's an opportunity cost. That's time. You may make some mistakes that you may have avoided if you had paid someone to help you on the way. But in some way, shape, or form, we're going to pay. The question is, how do you want to pay? What does that look like for you? Everybody has a personal journey that is going to be slightly different. So hoping that helps. Next question is Jamie. Jamie says, hi, Rob. I'm a civil engineer with extensive experience in infrastructure projects. My background includes contract administration, quantity surveying, and project management. I'm interested in exploring how I can leverage my skill and experience to move into property development. Could you share any advice how to make this transition and where to start? Thank you for your insights. Okay, Jamie. So firstly, you're not alone in this department, mate. We have plenty of people that actually come from industry in some way, shape, or form, where they are very, very, very understanding of one piece of the puzzle. So we might have a builder come to us. We might have a development manager come to us. And in this instance, yourself with your civil engineering experience, you understand one element of the process very, very well. And that element is a little later in the cycle. Okay. Now, for you, you need to go back to the start of the process. Okay. So, how to find it, how to fund it. They are typically the questions that we have from someone like yourself. And so we have to go back, and knowing that we know lots, we have to recognize that at the start of the journey, we actually don't know much. And we're pretty much in the exact same position as a complete newbie coming into the field with a little bit of insights into the process. Okay. Now, when you get through the finding it and funding it stage, and you actually get into the deployment stage, that's when all of your skills start to come in. And at that point, you get to double down and race ahead. Okay. But for the very, very start, you're going to go as slow as a complete newbie that doesn't know anything at all. And the finding it and funding it part is the most critical element of that process. Okay. Now, as I touched on a little bit earlier, 90% of all deals that are developable are not profitable. So the key is to understand where these deals are actually making sense. Where are the people being migrated to? Where are they being pushed by state governments, local governments, etc.? And when we understand that, we can then say how many opportunities in the area. Are there evidence of other people doing those deals? Can I reverse engineer those deals? Can I prove those people are profitable? And if that's the case, does that mean that I can also make money in that area too? So that's basically the gist of it. Everything I've said to all the brand newbies that asked the questions before, Jamie, I guess very much apply to yourself in this instance as well. Next question is Derek. Derek says, "Hi Rob, I'm currently looking to do a subdivision and build and keep the development with my father in Western Australia, where he provides the unencumbered land, which is suitable for a 3-lot project. I would be providing the full financing. Would you mind touching on the feasibility and how to structure a JV in which we partition the finished lots in such a way to avoid stamp duty?" Okay, I have to be very careful. I can't give you advice here on the petitioning side of things. What I will say is the petitioning side of things is the idea is to minimize your stamp duty elements of it. I think that your father-in-law would be able to do that. Sorry, not your father-in-law, your father would be able to do that because he already owns the land himself. You might not be able to do that. You're going to have to speak to a lawyer in WA with regards to that. The rules around deeds of petition, as it's called, vary from state to state, and you'll need to actually speak to a solicitor that specializes in that for your instance. Now, that said, how would you fund the deal? What you said to me was the property is unencumbered. And because it's unencumbered, that means there's a whole bunch of equity that's already sitting in the deal. So you'll need some liquid cash to get all of your I guess, development approvals in place. So town planner and civil engineer and architects and all those sorts of things and the application fees. But when it actually comes to the construction phase, the equity that is in the deal is an opportunity to tap into where the deal itself is able to secure its own construction because the equity is actually trapped inside there. In order to do that, that is potentially going to be residential lending, but more likely that is going to be commercial construction finance, mate. So I would be starting to speak to commercial lenders, not just your standard resi lenders, where they're going to see that equity sitting in there and they're going to say, we can unlock that development opportunity for you. Hoping that helps, mate, and good luck with your project with your dad. One other point, because your dad's owned it for such a long time, what I would say is just be very conscious of this. He would have had a whole bunch of capital growth that's actually happened in the property all by itself. And the ability for him to sell that now would mean that he is either capital gains tax exempt if it was his PPR, or he would have a 50% capital gains tax discount because he's owned it for more than 12 months. When you start to do the development, that then starts to complicate things. And so my strong suggestion, remembering 90% of these deals aren't profitable, my strong suggestion is to pretend that you are buying it today in today's market. If I paid today in today's market, including things like stamp duty, would the deal still be a deal? Now, if the answer to that is yes, then you get the capital growth plus you get the development uplift. If the answer to that is no, then there's a strong chance that you're just doing a very, very complicated process to unlock what your dad has already unlocked through the capital growth. So be very careful that that you don't complicate your life unnecessarily, and I would be doing that assessment first. Okay, going to wrap it up pretty soon, folks. Not last question. Hopefully, let's see if I've got a couple more. Lachlan says, "Hi Rob, how would you start out in deal finding, and how do you specifically monetize this? What would a standard deal finder's fee be? I've done a Bachelor of Property through Bond University and have some background in small land subdivision projects in Tasmania. After being the CFO to a Gold Coast property investment agency for the past 2 years, I'm looking to move into development sector full time. Do you think that some deal finding would be a good place to start, or is there no better time than the present to go in on my projects all in?" So, Lachlan, detailed answer here. So, two parts to this. One, if you were just to be a deal finder, depending upon the state that you're actually doing that in, you may need to have a real estate agent's license. That's the first part. Okay, you're going to need to find that out in your particular state. That is going to vary in each instance. Whether you do or not or don't, the typical deal finding fee is going to be in the vicinity of 2% of the purchase price of the property, plus GST where applicable if you're earning more than 75K per year. Okay. Now I say typical fee. There are some times that you can actually charge more for that, but that's got to be an absolutely cracking deal to actually justify that you're actually going to be doing that. Okay. Now, two ways to engage. Way number one: people come to you, they give you their requirements, and you go searching for deals for them. Now, if you do that, you're exerting all of your energy on finding them a deal and looking for their parameters. And if you have many clients, you're going to be looking at many deals in many places, and you're going to be scattered. And by the time you actually find a deal, you go back to that person. They may have already grabbed a deal through another mechanism, and they may not be in a position to move that on. So you might do a whole bunch of energy and get no financial result. For that reason, a lot of people charge a fee to the incoming purchaser to say, I need to cover my time on the off chance that actually occurs, as well as, I guess, the actual finder's fee itself. Okay. Now, the other way is to not look for deals for other people, but instead just look for deals for you. And if you look for deals for you, you're going to find circumstances where it doesn't suit your financial capacity, but you have determined it's developable and you have determined it's profitable, and you know what the terms are the vendors are looking for. It just doesn't suit you. So you then turn to the community and go, hey, I've actually got this deal. Who would like that in this particular area? Okay. Now, in that instance, you're progressing your journey, and you might crack onto a deal where that vendor's circumstances allow you to do one of those no or low money down deals, in which case, because you're hunting for you, you're straight into the game first go, mate. And if you don't, you have determined developable, profitable terms, flick it on for a finder's fee. So either way, you should be able to profit from the process. Next question comes from Lindy. And Lindy says, last question, I should say. I have a property on 2 lots with 1 title, also known as a splitter block. The vacant land requires civil works services for water, sewer, stormwater to 1 property. The property is in Somerset Council region. Can you give me an estimate on how much it would cost you to get the services to the property, or who should I contact to get the figures? So, Lindy, firstly, let's talk about what is a splitter block. So you've got 2 lots on 1 title. That means that at some point in the past, that has been pre-approved by, I guess, the local government and the state government that is possible. So it is, because of this, council approval is not required, and the services that you're talking about are deemed to be in place. That means that you don't mandatorily have to provide them, however, the incoming purchaser may want them to be installed and may not know how to do that. So it makes it more attractive to sell it by installing those services, but not mandatory to install it. Okay. Now, you've already identified that one property is well serviced and the other property is not. And so there is, I guess, the first person that you would reach out to would be a civil engineer. The civil engineer would understand what the services are that are actually sitting, I guess, adjacent to your property. You can do those searches yourself through Before You Dig Australia, BYDA, Before You Dig Australia, and they can actually tell you where the sewer, the stormwater, and the water is on your particular property, and whether or not you can actually connect to that. Now, depending upon your area, okay, and this I'm answering this to apply to everyone in Australia rather than specifically Somerset. Okay, some of your utility providers have a concept called a standard connection. Now, a standard connection means that the asset that you're connecting to is either located on your property or just outside the boundary of your property, either on the nature strip or in the road reserve. Now, if that's the case, then it is a standard price book in order to look that up. A standard connection has a standard price book. You just look up the price, pay the fee, and somewhere between 20 and 30 days later, they come and do all the work and install it for you and give you a certificate of connection. If for any reason they do not offer a standard connection service, or B, the asset is located in your adjacent neighbour's property, then your civil engineer is the only answer with regards to designing a non-standard connection in order to connect that. And so that price point is going to vary significantly based on, I guess, the depth of that service, the capacity of that service, and a whole bunch of other things. So it's a very, very wide range. It could be as little as $5,000 a connection, or to $50,000, $80,000 for a connection, depending upon the challenges that we're actually trying to overcome. Your civil engineer is the answer to that. They are going to give you the insights on that price range, and also how do you actually engage with your utility providers in order to get there. Anyway, folks, that's it. Hoping, whoops, I completely forgot to put my open mic night question. Hoping that helped you on your property development journey. We do these open mic nights on the first Sunday of every month. So if you want to get your question answered next time, click on the link below, propdev.info open-mic. Submit your question and I'll do what I can to help you on your property development journey. That said, folks, hoping to see you at one of our upcoming meetups. We run these meetups all the way around the country. We run them Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. Soon to be Perth. That is coming soon, folks. Let me reassure you of that. They are physical. They also live stream. So no matter where you are in the country, we run more than 45 events a year, and looking forward to seeing you at one of those. Until then, folks, hope to see you in the near future at one of our events. Till then, bye for now.